I spent 7 months running this module for my party, and they did not finish any of the side quests. They didn't do any of them. If you are running Lost Mine of Phandelver, it's a good chance you're probably new at dungeon mastering. And even if you're not, your players probably are. So what I would suggest is, before every single session, you pick out a couple of rules that are relevant to not only your gameplay, but the characters that your players have. So what are the rules governing cover? Half cover and your 3/4 cover, and what that does for your armor class. And the objective here is to keep your players alive, at least during the first couple of levels. It's also going to teach everybody the rules at the same time. At the beginning of every session, you have 1 or 2 trivia questions. The reward for a correct answer is either an inspiration token or an additional 6 temporary hit points, whatever you choose. Point of inspiration for anybody who can recap our last session. All right, that's my, and that has nothing to do with Lost Mine of Phandelver. That's just my DM tip for you. Now, when it comes to running Lost Mine of Phandelver, yeah, it does look intimidating because it's this thick book, and how much of it do you have to read before you start running the adventure? The truth is very little. I mean, if you stripped away everything else, ultimately what it comes down to is Lost Mine of Phandelver is you save Gundren and you defeat Nesnar. That's it. Everything else is gravy. Everything else is location. Everything else is dungeon design, and you don't need to even remember any of that stuff. Yeah, Cragmaw Hideout. So, players are going to come in through Area 1. Area 2, they've got some couple of hidden goblins there. In Area 3, there's some dogs chained up. You've got Area 7, which is just a water trap in case your players are spied by the goblin up on the bridge near Area 5. And then you've got Area 8, which is where, is it Clarg? Yeah, it's Clarg. Clarg's over there in Area 8. And then you've got Area 6 where Ymik is at. And that's where Sildar is as well. I know I've jumped the gun. You're like, well, what about Goblin Arrows? Well, let me tell you about Goblin Arrows. All it is an ambush. You're walking through a ravine, for lack of a better word. There's cliffs on either side. They're going to run into the horses of Gundren and Sildar, killed by Goblin Arrows. And then they're going to get ambushed themselves by these goblins. All you need to remember about that is one of the goblins needs to be left alive. Otherwise, your players aren't going to know that they need to head up towards Cragmaw Hideout. You could, with an investigation check, show that the bodies had obviously been dragged away from this location up that way, and if they had any sense about them, they'd go and investigate. If you try to memorize everything that's listed here, you're going to drive yourself batty, and you don't need to. Your first session, unless you guys are having some marathon session, is not going to go any further than the Cragmaw Hideout. And odds on you probably aren't going to get past the Goblin ambush. But if you do, and you get as far as the Cragmaw Hideout, trying to memorize what's going on inside that hideout is not necessary. What you need to know is Clarg is in there, and he is taking orders from King Groll, who's getting his orders from Nesnar, the Black Spider. Aside from that, there's Ymik, and Ymik is a goblin, and he wants to oust Clarg because he wants to run the show. Ymik has Sildar, and Sildar makes great bartering tool for Ymik if Ymik convince your party to go and kill off Clarg. And those orders are simple. Ambush anybody that's coming through this area and confiscate all their stuff. We're specifically looking for a dwarf and a map. But Nesnar's trying to either get that map so that he knows the location, or confiscate that map so nobody else knows the location. That's really up to you. If you want to twist this about, I did. I twisted this module 6 ways from Sunday. For instance, Clark's got a treasure chest, and in his treasure chest, he's got a little frog idol. And I made that thing cursed. The moment it was picked up, the party member that picked it up was cursed. Do this if you want to, don't do it if you don't want to. But what I did was I made this frog have a turn in combat order. So it would roll in initiative. When you say roll for initiative, it's rolling too. And you have the player that's holding the frog roll that initiative. So what's your frog's initiative? And as soon as their turn comes up, you have them roll another d20 for what the frog does, because it's a 1 in 20 random thing. Okay? And I wrote out 20 different effects. All of the odd numbers are negative. All of the even numbered rolls are a positive effect. For instance, if you rolled a 1, you're summoning 1d4 times the curse holder's level, number of bullywugs to fight against the party. If you roll a 2, all party members within 60 feet, their AC is increased by 2 for 2 rounds as a result of hardened reptilian scales forming all over their body. If you think that's OP, then don't do it. I didn't have a problem doing it. We all had a blast. As a matter of fact, if you roll a 20, the curse holder may drop the frog and free themselves of the curse. Or not. You can choose to keep it. And now, when my player finally rolled that 20, she dropped it. But she had to roll another dice to determine whether or not her character would, because she wanted to keep it. But at the same time, she didn't want to keep it. So, I mean, you got a 50-50 shot. Something either good is going to happen or something really bad is going to happen. It added a little flavor to the game, although I got a lot of grief from folks on Facebook saying that was way too OP for level 1 players. Maybe it's OP for your players, but it wasn't for mine. Nobody died in my game. Aside from those 2 main players in Cragmaw Hideout, Yemek and Clark, everybody else is just goblins to be killed. If your party is laying waste to them without breaking a sweat, my suggestion is you start upping the number of them and, their strengths, multi-attack, pack tactics, stuff like that. If on the other hand, those goblins are kicking your party's butt, reverse it. Cut down their hit points. I never rolled behind a screen. It kind of takes the thrill out of it. There's a chance those dice are going to be really unkind to your players. But that doesn't mean you need to fudge rolls. You can do other things to mitigate a bad roll. For instance, the amount of damage that roll is going to incur. The number of baddies you've got, how many hit points they have. Your players don't need to know how many hit points a goblin's got. They could all have 1 apiece. 1 hit and they're down. You're the DM. You can keep anybody alive that you want to. If one of your party's members falls in battle, maybe there's this pool of water in Cragmaw Hideout that's got some magical properties and you bring it back to life. Make something up. Don't kill your party. If you get player deaths within your first session or your first couple of sessions, I mean, who's going to want to come back and play? Well, my guy just died. Later, kill him. Trust me, later on, you're going to try and kill him, and you won't be able to, because it's really difficult to kill your players in 5th edition. I know, there's going to be some people out there going, oh, Harris, you don't know what you're talking about. I killed all my... Yeah, I'm sure you probably did, but there are things that you can do that nobody knows that you're actually doing without fudging rolls to keep your party alive. For instance, at the beginning of the game, you do the trivia question. What are the rules for cover? +2 AC for half cover, +5 AC for 3/4 cover. What are the rules for mounted combat? If it's relevant to your game, if you foresee that at some point in your game you're going to run into this exact topic, then ask it. And then try and implement it somewhere in the game so that everybody experiences it. And in this way, you end up all learning the rules together. Nobody's left behind. And you award them either inspiration so that they can re-roll bad rolls, or 6 temporary hit points. Like I said, you make them as many as you want. But there's ways of getting around dying. Alright, Sildar. I wrote up this big thing for Sildar to say. I'm going to read it to you so that you get the gist of what Sildar is all about. I thought of him as being more of a father figure, rather than a washed-up old has-been that got overtaken by a bunch of goblins. And I wanted the party to feel the same way about him. So, this is what I wrote. Sildar meets the party the following morning in the common room of the inn. We're assuming he's already been rescued. He's dressed in the fine blue and gray raiment of his station in the Lord's Alliance. Smiling as if to old friends, he invites them to sit at a large round table. I took the liberty of ordering us all breakfast, if you wouldn't mind joining me. I need to speak to you all of some matters of great importance. But first, I believe I have a debt to settle. He drops a small leather pouch of coins in the center of the table. The 50 gold in payment of your escort. With all the excitement yesterday, I neglected to properly introduce myself. My name is Sildar Hallwinter. I am an agent of the Lord's Alliance, reporting directly to the Lord Protector of Neverwinter, Dagult Neverember. It was he who commissioned my presence in Phandelver. The Lord's Alliance? Well, it's a special group of allied political powers concerned with mutual security and prosperity. Members of the Order strive to ensure the safety of cities and settlements by eliminating threats. In addition to providing military support and a form of the peaceful airing of differences, the Alliance has always acted under the principle that communities with common cause that engage in trade are less likely to go to war with one another. In the last 3 or 4 years, settlers from the cities of Neverwinter and Waterdeep have begun the hard work of reclaiming the ruins of Phandelver. A bustling frontier settlement has grown up upon the site of the old town and is now home to farmers, woodcutters, fur traders, and prospectors drawn by stories of gold in the foothills. Unfortunately, more than a few bandits and brigands have settled here as well, taking advantage of the fact that the area has no local lord or authority to chase them off. At present, Phandelver has no functioning government, though the townsfolk elect someone to act as townmaster each year. The townmaster serves as judge to minor disputes and keeps any records that need keeping, but holds little leverage over those who have no regard for the law. The current townmaster is a male human banker named Harbin Webster, and is, as is to be expected, a little out of his depth. Steps were taken to correct this when the Alliance dispatched an agent by the name of Iorno Albrecht to Phandelver. Iorno's role was to bolster the townmaster's authority, tutor him if necessary, in the ways of governing, but ultimately to establish order, while submitting regular reports back to the Alliance. Strangely, we have heard no word from him since he left. 10 days ago, your patron, Gundren Rockseeker, arrived in Neverwinter to submit a claim for the lost mine of Wave Echo Cave. More than a few false claims to the mine have been made over the centuries, but with no proof, authorities have never given the claims much attention. But the rock seekers come from reputable stock. What's more, Gundren carried with him a map to the exact location. This evidence was enough to garner the Lord's attention. With the prospect of a very valuable mine re-establishing the wealth and trade to this area of the coast, and the not-so-small matter of a missing agent of the Lord's Alliance, I was commissioned to escort Gundren back to Phandelver. As you know, our trip was waylaid by goblins. Some 70 of them overwhelmed us, killing our horses. They rained down from the trees and flooded in from behind the brush. I'm sure I ended 6 of the little bastards before they swarmed on the dwarf, demanding my surrender lest they tear him to pieces. There were too many. Gundren would have been dead before I could have taken another step. But discretion is the better part of valor, they say. The bugbear you defeated in the caves was their tribe leader, but as I discovered, he is subordinate to someone else. From what I was able to discern, he had been given orders to raid any travelers headed towards Phandelver. He was looking for Gundren, or more specifically Gundren's map. I believe he was taken to a location called Cragmaw Castle on the orders of an entity known as the Black Spider. Who or what this Black Spider is, I do not know. nor do I know the location of Cragmaw Castle. But that, if you're obliging, is where you come in. I was up early this morning making preparations and was able to establish a note of credit here in town. The Alliance has authorized the employ of deputies in matters of urgency, and as I now have a missing dwarf as well as a missing agent, it makes far more sense to employ individuals of your talent rather than send word to Neverwinter that I require assistance and then wait for their reply. Time really is of the essence. I believe your skills would be of great help and would appreciate your cooperation in the matter. As compensation, I can pay you 500 gold pieces for the safe return of Gundren, assuming he is still alive, and the destruction of his captors. 100 up front to assist in the purchase of weaponry and provisions, the rest upon completion. Question the townfolk. Find Cragmaw Castle. It would not be unreasonable to assume that the creature Ymik may know more than he claims. This is assuming he left Ymik alive. It seems the prosperity of Phandelver lies in Gundren's recovery. It is imperative that he be found. Lastly, if you hear any word on Iarno Albrecht or Gundren's 2 brothers, I want to know. My immediate responsibility is Harbin Webster. You can find me at the townmaster's office while there is still daylight. I will be here at the inn after nightfall. Regardless of the hour, I want word as soon as you have it. Gentlemen, you are now in the employ of the Lord's Alliance. I urge you not to take this commission lightly. Enjoy your breakfast. If things go badly, I fear it may be the last hot meal you see for days. What I would suggest is you kind of let your players tell the story. Get far enough into the reading of the module that you know where the thing is going, so that if they go there, you can ad-lib. But ultimately, you're going to write down 1 or 2 sentences in your little Dungeons and Dragons journal. I've got one, and if you don't, you should get one, because it looks a lot cooler if you're reading out of a fancy leather book than if you're reading out of this thing, Write down 1 or 2 sentences about what you expect to happen during this session. They're going to get this far, and if they get further than that, you slow the pace down, which is easy to do. It's not as difficult as you think. You just start doing a lot more dialogue, a lot more role play. You can slow a session down. And like I said, this module is really kind of cut and dry. You're going to rescue Gundren, and you're going to defeat Nesnar. There's nothing else to this module. Everything else is just glitter and gravy. For instance, how did we get a guy like Iarno Albrecht? We find out later is Glassstaff. Spoilers. He's gone bad. How did he go bad? He was working for the Lord's Alliance. So what I did was I'm big about cursing things. I cursed that glass staff that he got from Nesnar, so that his alignment, it came with all those fancy, wonderful spells and powers and whatnot, and the wizard of your group is going to want it. But you make sure that if he spends any time attuning to it, A, he has to attune to it. B, if he spends any time studying over the thing before he attunes to it, or he has the ability to do identify magical object kind of thing, you let him know what he's walking into. It's going to change his alignment. I don't care what your prefix is, but your suffix is changing to evil. So if your prefix is lawful, neutral, chaotic, whatever, and your suffix is good, neutral, whatever, it's going evil. It was the only way I could justify seeing how Iarno might just flop sides. So when your wizard of the group takes that staff, change his alignment to evil. Now, I've gotten criticisms for this because a lot of folks said that's taking away a player's agency. You are forcing a player to suddenly become something he doesn't want to become. And I agree. It does take away a player's agency if I hadn't given the opportunity to drop that damn staff. Right before they came into battle with Iarno, they ran into a bunch of red brands, and they had a drinking contest with them. I made it so that they had to drink these guys under the table rather than get into a sword fight, because I figured, My guys were turning into murder hobos. They went into the Red Brown Bar, what do they call that, the Sleeping Giant, and they killed everybody. They started a bar fight and killed people, and I was just like, all right, you guys do realize that it would be construed murder as murder in anybody else's land. And so then they paid the bartender 10 gold, because 10 gold to them was a lot of money. They were talking level 1 broke as broke can get players. They paid the only 10 gold they had to get their to keep the bartender quiet. And then they stuffed the bodies in a hole in the wall in the basement of the bar. I toyed with the idea of having that come back to haunt them, but I didn't do it. By the time they had made it back into town after Cragmaw Castle, it was 7 months later. I mean, we played the game back in October. It started in October and didn't finish up until 7 months afterwards. Would have been May or so. And they didn't do any of the side quests. They rescued Gundren. As far as they know, they got Gundren back to home base. And then they battled Nesnar, who I had him appearing to them over and over again. He'd pop up and he was condescending and smug, but he was very. He wanted the party to swap sides and work for him. And so he was acting as like this coy protector. He was a condescending, smug, coy protector, and he wasn't going to start a fight with these guys because he wanted the party to come and work for him. And they went and at the very end, our last session, they went and battled him, and I swear to God, he was down to 3 hit points, and I made him cast darkness, and he was gone. I actually gave him the stats of a Drow Matriarch, because by then, they're level 5, and Nesnar would have walked all over him, so I gave him different stats. And there's something else to point out, too. You don't stick with this. The 5th edition's got this thing called a challenge rating. Your CR. That's your challenge rating. You want your players to equal whatever the challenge rating is. So a party of 4, level 2, should be able to take on a level 2 challenge rating monster. But what it doesn't take into consideration, your CR rating, your challenge rating, doesn't take into consideration things like, do your players have an abundance of health potions? Do they have healing spells? Or do they not? Because if they don't have any way of healing themselves, they're up the proverbial creek. But if they've got healing potions coming out their stinking ears, man, they can take on a challenge rating several levels higher than they are. Are you the type of DM that counts arrows? Because if your guys are ranged fighters and you're counting their arrows, at some point they're going to run out of arrows. But if they've got an unlimited supply of arrows, then CR rating is not quite as scary. But if you're itemizing everything, then a CR rating suddenly becomes a little bit more serious. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is don't make it complicated. Every session you come up with 1 or 2 questions, trivia questions, to help keep your players not only alive but educate everybody in the game. And you reward correct answers with your +6 temporary hit points. Temporary hit points are like additional hit points above and beyond your maximum hit point. But once they're used, they don't come back after a long rest. Or you give them an inspiration token. You let them choose. Which one do you want? You want the inspiration or you want the temporary hit points? You write your 1 or 2 lines about what you want to occur in that session. You print out the monster stats for the beasties that you're going to have fight your party. And then you pick out what treasure. How much treasure are you going to give them? I always kept my players poor, because hungry adventurers continue to adventure. But rich adventurers are like, I'm buying a fortress over there and get me some concubines. See ya. And then they're gone. But if you get you don't have 2 nickels to rub together, they'll go in your dungeon. As for magic items, make sure everybody gets an equal share. So if you're given a magic item to one of your players, and then make sure your other players acquire something of equivalent value, equivalent power rating. Don't worry about OP in your characters. That's the reason why the Monster Manual gave you beasties like the Tarrasque. If your guys get too strong, quit throwing goblins at them, man. Grab a bunch of freaking gelatinous cubes. Which, by the way, are not that hard to kill. You know, sometimes the dice go in your favor and they just walk all over your bad guys. And sometimes the dice go opposite direction and your guys just walk all over them, and they really shouldn't. It's just back again why a CR rating is a load of malarkey. I mean, it's a good thing to show to new GMs. Like, here's a general guideline for how you might want to go about planning your bad guys. But above and beyond that, once you get a good feel for how to do it, don't waste your time looking at it anymore. You use whatever beasties work for your story. And reskin the stats. So if the stats are too high, then lower them. Make them smaller. They don't have to be as gnarly as the Monster Manual says they ought to be. So this is the Halflings Gym by R.A. Salvatore, and it is the third book in the Icewind Dale trilogy. And in Chapter 3, Conyberry's Pride, Agatha, or the Banshee. I don't know if it's going to help your game at all, but you could read that. You could read Chapter 3 there and figure out what she's all about. It's not necessary to read the whole book, although they're good if you haven't read any of the drits. So as for the design of the dungeons, as for the design of the caves, as for any of that stuff, don't worry yourself over making sure that you've got all the maps memorized. Hell, Wave Echo Cave is like 30 some odd rooms. I used 10. I made a bunch of polystyrene dungeon tile rooms, things like that, and I let the players set it up. I'm like, here, build yourself the place where I'm going to kill your characters. And they did. They built up their thing, and as they'd enter any particular room that they had designed, I put in the description of the monsters and the baddies that were in the module. You don't need to worry yourself about being true to the module, because like I said, there's only two things that you need to remember in this book, in this module. One is you're saving Gundren. Two is you're defeating Nesnar. And you really don't need to either do any of those, do either of those things. You could have your parties could join up with Nesnar, and next thing you know, you're off into the Underdark. That'd be cool. Fighting Drow, or in the slave pits of the Mind Flayers, whatever. The ability to adapt to whatever your players present to you is what's going to make you a good DM. Being able to spin a tale or to ad-lib, to keep up with their ad-libbing is far more important than being able to memorize what the module says. Because what the module says is rescue Gundren, defeat Nesnar, and then it fills in all of the other blanks with a bunch of details that are not relevant, or they are but they're not. You know, you could fill them up with other things, and the story still hasn't changed. That's what I mean. If you changed everything in the module, but you kept save Gundren and defeat Nesnar, it's still the same story. So if you forget something, or you overlook something, don't worry about it. You're not doing the thing injustice. You're ad-libbing. You're being a good DM. And I think that's the secret. Don't try and memorize it. Read it. Become familiar with it. Understand what the story is, where the locations are. So you got Cragmaw Castle, you got Phandelver itself, you've got Wave Echo Cave. You really don't, trust me, man, you don't want to memorize Wave Echo Cave. There's like 4 bad guys in there you need to know about. There's a Spectator, there's a Flame Skull, there's the Wraith, and then there's Nesnar, and the rest of it is a bunch of, doesn't matter if it's skeletons or gelatinous cubes or owl bears, whatever. It's stuff to throw at your party to try and give them a challenge and a good fun evening. Doesn't matter if you're true to it or not. And then you've got Red Brand Hideout. You know what? I took Red Brand Hideout and I replaced half of the stuff in there with my own homebrewy stuff. There was a gem lock I got from Runehammer. He's got a channel. He's fun. Check him out. And I replaced a hallway with his gem lock. The guys couldn't get out of there without going through my little puzzle room. I've done several puzzle rooms. It had nothing to do with the module at all because they were just replacing really boring, blasé. This is a tunnel. It's a hallway. Here's another room, and it's got nothing of any importance in it. It's a bunch of empty crates. Woohoo! Yay! You know, fill it up full of things that are exciting to you, or would be exciting to your players. And just remember the basis of what the storyline happens to be to the module. Stick to that, and the rest of it you can change up as you see fit, or do whatever the heck you want with it. Anyway, don't stress. Good luck. It's an awesome, fun game. Wonderful, good time. It's a heck of a lot better than being in a rock and roll band. I know. I shouldn't say that. Go be in a rock and roll band. Bye.